What's next for a neighborhood under siege? We'll have to wait and see. Reporting live, Sadie Sinclair, Channel 7 News.
This is San Francisco.
Last October, I was in Tokyo and I met up with my friend Mai, who has been organizing with the Palestine Solidarity Movement in Japan. And she introduced me to Hanin and Nadina at an anarchist community space called Nam Nam Space in Koenji in Tokyo. And if you happen to be in Tokyo, definitely check it out. It shares a floor with the Dig a Hole zine shop in Koenji. Anyway, they were holding an event for the release of a photo book as well as a benefit for Simo, the photographer for the photo book. Simo is a Palestinian living in Gaza. And I was interested in how Palestine solidarity has looked in Japan. I knew of certain Japan-specific protests, chants put over the music to Sailor Moon, the Sailor Moon theme song. And I am always interested in hearing what seems to be working, what tactics have been successful, and how to sustain the movement from people who are organizing in different places. So much of the organizing this past year, in spite of, I guess you could say like limited successes in certain areas, it was really affirming to see some very, very successful actions and hearing about that. And it was also just affirming to hear that, like in the Bay, strangers are becoming comrades and friends and family through this fight. And that includes Hanin and Nadina and Mai, who met and became friends through the movement a little over a year ago. And so here is the conversation we recorded once I got back to California. So I'm here with Hanin and Nadina. We're just going to start out by, I'm going to ask, would you say a little bit about yourselves and how you're connected to the Palestine Solidarity Movement?
Okay, my name is Hanin. I'm from Gaza and from Lifta as well. I was born in Gaza, but actually raised most of my life in Japan. And I mean, I'm connected to the movement because obviously I'm Palestinian, and I've lived in Japan for quite some time. And so after the genocide started last October, October 2023, since now we're even past the last October, I decided to, at the time I wasn't in Japan, I decided to come back to Japan and try to, push the awareness, protests, fundraising, anything that we could do really to kind of help in this tough time. And yeah, that's what we've been doing for the last 400 days.
I mean, it seems like it's been working in that on the West Coast of the US, like we are getting some of the news from successes and setbacks with some of the organizing in Japan, in particular, like with the recent like Nagasaki and Hiroshima peace celebrations. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But thanks for that. And Nadina?
Hello, my name is Nadina. I am a community organizer here in Tokyo, and I'm one of the founding members of Nam Nam Space, which is an anarchist queer space here in Tokyo. The only, I believe, named queer space that is in Tokyo. I got into doing things for Palestine through friends of mine. My friend Aisha made me really passionate about it, and when I met my fellow founder Beto, we really connected over Palestine as an issue, as a like all-spanning moral issue. And I feel really passionate about it because my family background is also from Bosnia, so I think I have like a kind of moral obligation as someone who is a war survivor myself to stand and advocate for all oppressed peoples.
Yeah, and I got a chance to check out Nanman in Koenji in Tokyo when I was there a couple of weeks back. Such a cool space. Anyone who's visiting Japan, if you're in Tokyo, check it out.
Thank
Uh,
you.
I was like, we need more spaces like that here in San Francisco, which has this reputation of being like, a queer mecca. There are a few of them, but yeah, we were talking earlier before we started recording about like the lack of like the third space. Um, so I'm sure that will come into the conversation a little later. And was just wondering if you two were familiar with each other before October 2023.
No.
Yeah, yeah,
No.
yeah. So this was like, yeah, as a result of the solidarity movement in Japan.
Mm.
Like, I know that I've met so many people that I did not know before that lived in San Francisco, like down the street from me. Um, that has been like one of the, I guess, silver linings to
Yeah,
the last year plus for
100%.
me. Um, and being at Nam Nam, like you could tell that there were a lot of people that like were really getting to know each other on a deeper level, especially during this time where I know in the US people are feeling like so isolated,
Yeah.
according to the surveys, but like anecdotally, like, friends and family who have not a lot of people who they're seeing regularly in their lives, and like they're working from home, and not even seeing coworkers anymore. uh Organizing, I think, has been a something of a lifeline for people. um so for people who are in the US, was wondering if you could talk about how the Palestine solidarity protests have looked over the past year plus, compared to previous protests. Like, have
Mm.
they been bigger in number? Have they been, have you noticed a lot of queer people? Like, yeah, just, different things you've seen.
Do you want to go or shall I?
Go for it.
I think I think I'm still quite fairly new to like Palestine organizing in general. I think I've been in like aware of the issue of Palestine for maybe 4 years at this point, which I think is perhaps more than the average person who really kind of like got into it after last October. It was not an issue that was spoken about widely before that time. And now it feels there's exponential growth in people who are talking about it. It is a general topic that I would say most people are at least kind of baseline level aware of, whereas previously I think it was something that people who were very into politics and geopolitics and world affairs were discussing, but was not really on the average person's kind of plate, whereas now it really is. And in
Mm.
terms of like queer organizing in Japan specifically, there's been two specific queer, we call them Queers for Palestine protests. And there was also a specific boycott of Tokyo Rainbow Pride this year
Mm-hmm.
because Israel markets itself as a gay-friendly destination, despite having no legislation that is pro-queer. You can't get married, as far as I know, if you're a queer couple in Israel. And yet they tout themselves as a very tolerant society, and that they tout themselves as this destination that queer people should go to because it's safe and friendly and all of that stuff. So this year we as an organization took a stance against Tokyo Rainbow Pride, but we didn't, there were other friends and allies of ours who participated because they had already paid the substantial fee to participate. So obviously we weren't going to protest against our own allies, but we did stage overall boycott and recommended pro-Palestine queer venues and companies that people could happily support this Pride season, as well as people who felt that they needed to attend, Pride for some reason. They all kind of wore black and were questioning things and were actively really, really taking a stance, which is, I think, never before seen, really. Corporate, like Pride in Tokyo specifically, is pretty corporate. And this year, people took a political stance on it, which is unprecedented.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, more generally, like this is a zine that was produced, an anti-pinkwashing zine. We've had a couple episodes on pinkwashing here in the US, but yeah, I mean, it is clearly an issue that's happening all over the world. So it's, cool to hear that it's being raised and that people, some of the, I mean, it's the lies associated with pinkwashing are being exposed over there as well. Yeah, Hanin, what have you noticed about the protests movement over there?
Yeah, well, I want to start by saying, major shout out and kudos to Nam Nam Space because it was such a big part of the community building aspect of the movement, really bringing people together, making sure people are, connecting, talking on a deeper level. I remember one of the first earlier, non-public events that we had in Nam Nam Space was called The First Chapter. And it was to discuss whether it was pretty much 22 people there talking about whether they believed in a one state, two state, or a different kind of solution for the future of Palestine. And it was so interesting to be all there together, people from all over the world, not even just, Japanese or just foreigners, just a mix of us talking about our perspective on, such a deep personal level.
Mm.
And that was like a very early on event as well. And just so many more events that followed in that space, exhibitions and other kinds of, talks and cooking Palestinian food by Aida, and just so many things happened, so many memorable times at Nam Nam Space. And I think it was a big part of actually growing the movement because people kind of had a hub, a spot to kind of go to because they knew that there would be people there that had the, same kind of values or morals or, they cared about the same kinds of things in the world. So honestly, it was a really, really big part of it, I would say. And when we didn't have Nam Nam Space for a while since they relocated, it was like, I feel like it was kind of like a sadder time, people were a little bit more distant. Because it was really that like kind of hub for people, and it really connected a lot of us. We got to know each other as friends, not as just as people that organize and protest, etc. But really, we got to know each other personally. So that was amazing, honestly. But in terms of Japan, and it's interesting because I lived here since I was 7, and then I left. But I've always had two kinds of reactions about being Palestinian. It was either like, like Palestina, what's that? Like, what's Palestine? That's like majority of the times I would say people didn't really know. And then when I would say, oh, it's near Egypt, near Jordan, they're still like, oh, okay. And then if I even mention the word Israel, they're like, ah, and it kind of clicks in their head, or it doesn't. Or the other reaction, it has been really passionate Japanese people that care about Palestine and have been to Palestine and have, gone there multiple times, or they started at MPO or some sort of work for Palestine. And one of them is Maki Yamamoto. She does the Japanese OBE, Palestinian like Tatriz OBE. And she's an example of somebody that just, got to know Palestinians here, went to visit Palestine herself, saw everything, saw the reality, and was just shocked, quit her job, decided to do this, this kind of like project where the women in Palestine do the tatris for the obi, and then it gets sent here to Japan, and it's, sold, displayed at exhibitions and so on. It was just like so beautiful to see that. And there are multiple people like that. There's Professor Tanami Sensei in Hiroshima. There's so many people that have just, once they heard about Palestine, they dedicated their whole being to Palestine. And of course, it's obviously not as many as the other reaction, which is what is Palestine. But I have come across so many of these individuals over the last few years, and it's been so beautiful. And then in the last year, of course, hundreds of individuals that I've come across, that have just been doing so much, just so dedicated for the fight. And I always say this, we're a small community. We're a small, if you compare our protests to the United States or to Europe, we're smaller, but we're very mighty. We're definitely very mighty, and we're able to do a lot. And even though our numbers are small, but it's definitely growing over time, that's for sure. Especially in a place like Japan where protesting isn't the easiest, expressing public dissent isn't so easy. It's hard. It really is does feel hard, but we're doing it because we want to raise awareness. We want people to care, and people are doing it in every way, shape, and form. You have people doing standing demos by themselves. You have people doing book reading demos at stations. You have people doing, placard making somewhere else. And then you have the other types of protests and marches that are kind of, you kind of see them elsewhere as well. But it's beautiful to see all these initiatives. And we're here in Tokyo, but the initiatives are happening all over Japan. And it's important to remember that, there's people rallying in Kyoto and Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Osaka and Okinawa and in Hokkaido. Literally from the top to the bottom of Japan, there's people rallying for Palestine. And it's really been very beautiful to see, as you said, the silver lining of this whole nightmare.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I feel like that kind of goes right into the next question, which is whether you have like a favorite sort of creative or new strategy that you've seen people using to raise awareness in Japan. You mentioned projects like creating the obi, using designs from people in Palestine brought back to Japan. Yeah, just wondering if there's any that were noteworthy that you've noticed. Maybe Nadina, if any come to mind.
I mean, I recently started lending my video editing skills to the cause. We've been we've been making some
Yes.
jokes online from some very unsavory influencers. But one thing I would also really love to shout out, because I think of it very often, is one of our partner venues, which is Substore in Koenji. Andika, who is Indonesian from Substore,
Yes.
he's one of the kindest, sweetest people you will ever meet. He is
Yes.
also one of the keepers and archivists of the largest collection of preserved Palestinian tourist posters in the world. That is an archive that exists here in Japan, and he keeps and maintains it, and he stores it and tours it, basically. So it shows kind of phenomenally how the history between Palestine and Israel has really changed, from these posters encouraging people to go and visit Palestine from Israel, and to go and see like, oh, beautiful historic Palestine, and kind of like some level of harmony to where we have now. That's a really impactful visual thing. And if, people want that exhibition to tour, it absolutely does tour and is
Yeah.
very worth seeing. And there are lots of examples of international solidarity with Palestine from like the 70s till now in that archive. It's a phenomenal archive that's worth seeing and very important. And I think the only such archive in the world, perhaps.
So cool. And especially as we have seen, like, I mean, in the US, like, it's just amazing how Zionist forces are attempting to just erase history. As it's as plain as like in our history books here in California, as people were, they're revised every couple of years, and um, our only Palestinian American congressperson, Rashida Tlaib, was, going to be named in the textbook. And, that was too much for the Zionists. And so you see like these ways that, I mean, that's a very clear way that Zionism is attempting to sort of like rewrite the past, or decide what counts as history, I suppose. Mai, thank you so much for coming.
Hi,
We have
I'm so
Mai
sorry.
as well. Cute backgrounds. By the way. Yeah, stoked you made it through. We've been talking a little bit about how Palestine Solidarity Movement has been going. Did you want to say a little bit about um, how you've seen the solidarity protests over the past year plus, like compared to previous years?
Right. So my name is Mai. Hello. And I have been organizing in Japan, not necessarily protests and demonstrations, but something like film festivals, particularly around gender and sexuality for the last 10 years. And prior to October 7th last year, I had known about what's going on in Palestine and have been incorporating that in some of the film festivals that happened in Japan. And since I was doing queer film festivals, I made subtitles for Dean Spade's Pinkwashing documentary. And I used that as a medium to convey the intersection between LGBTQ issues and colonialism, particularly in Palestine. But 10 years ago, not many people know about geography, aside from East Asia, I guess, in Japan. I guess that's pretty much the same in the US for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
And Middle East particularly sounded really like far away places. I'm sure Hanin talked about this too. Um, but when it's, something that they can see as related to their struggles, then I think people can take it more easily, with more receptively. But
Hmm.
still, it was more difficult to talk about it and why it's important to, for example, participate in BDS and stuff like that 10 years ago. And then since last year, I see a lot of shift in how people talk about Palestine. I think it's also because I'm involved in a very active organizing scene in Tokyo. But even though not mainstream media don't really talk about Palestine as much as we want them to, um, but since the Tokyo organizing scene was so active that there's something going on every day somewhere in Tokyo. Um, I think, for example, when I talk about it at workplace, people are first, they know the word Palestine. And then second, they are more receptive to what I want to talk to them about Palestine and Gaza. And for the first maybe half year to a year, I would still hear about, oh, what about Hamas? Those kind of
Mm.
major narrative, but I don't hear it anymore.
Yeah.
Um, part, I think it's partly because how prolonged this has been going on, but also I want to believe that some of the narratives that we wanted to push found their ways to get to people's mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's undeniable that the narrative has shifted so that, you know, it's just post-election here in the US, and Palestine absolutely played a part in how the election played out, because the Democrats have been so steadfast to their Zionist daddy donors. And a lot of people were sick of it. A lot of people didn't vote. A lot of people didn't vote as a result, or voted third party for the first time in their lives. But yeah, you mentioned Dean Spade. Dean Spade's been on the program a couple times. We'll link to those episodes in the show notes. And yeah, Mai, quickly, I'll ask you, like, has there been from the past year, have you seen any like creative or new tactics for raising the issue of Palestine solidarity that have particularly stuck out to you?
Hmm, let me think about it. Did you ask this question already to other people in this group?
Yeah, we can come back to it. Um,
Yeah, I'll think about it.
yeah,
Yes.
like I feel like there's some good stuff in
Ah,
here that I I can also add as like part of the intro to the episode too.
mm-mm. Yeah, okay, let me talk about the queers against Palestine, a queer against Israeli apartheid organizing. So our Pride in Tokyo, it's called Tokyo Rainbow Pride, happens in April. So it's 2 months earlier than the rest of the Pride events happening all over the world. And there have been organizing against Tokyo Rainbow Pride. Um, Having sponsors from BDS companies for many, many years by a small group of activists. But since Tokyo Rainbow Pride has taken a very commercialized approach to promote awareness and endorsements, the TRP says that since Japanese government is so stubborn, they want to appeal to the corporate since economy is like a religion here instead
Mm,
of actual religions.
yeah.
Um, and the
Yeah.
commercialization has been increasing and increasing. And even if you are not against, um, even if you're not pro-Palestine, some people were starting to feel uncomfortable. So there were a gray area people who want to, of course, the LGBTQ rights, it's not so, LGBTQ population is not so protected here legally. So there's a group of people who want to be like LGBTQ people themselves and the allies who want to endorse the TRP, but they are not quite unsure. And this year's TRP in particular, a lot of people were wondering who they would have as sponsors because of BDS targets, and when we saw the sponsor list, there were many companies who were complicit in genocide. So people started to ask them questions. But since there weren't any progress in withdrawing those sponsors, we decided to organize something, not really calling it anti-TRP, because I saw that many people were so torn since this is only one time in the year where LGBTQ people get to meet from all around Japan. And it means so much to people. And in Japan, the LGBTQ scene, especially in the Japanese-speaking realm, um, there are a lot of people who are just doing community work.
Mm,
And political work there's some kind of divide. Um,
hmm.
well, not really, but sorry, I feel like I'm going around, but sorry, it's not particularly true, but the activists, they're doing both. But the community is kind of divided between
Okay.
who are involved in community work and people who are also in the political work.
Gotcha.
And people who wanted to be pro-Palestine, they were feeling torn because they want to come to our organizing, the anti-apartheid event, but this is one time in the year where people can network. So if we make it so that it's confrontational or dividing, then we would lose those people. Even though they're pro-Palestine, you know what I mean? Because their priority is
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think, yeah. So I think it was important for us to not make it anti-TRP, but in a way that, hey, TRP do better type of way.
Yeah, that's always a thing that, yeah, like is important to consider in any of the organizing is like, yeah, like an aggressive stance versus trying to appeal to, you know, someone's compassion, empathy. It's a choice we have to make, and
Yeah.
it works, yeah, differently around different people.
And in intersectionality, I have been struggling with how to say incorporate intersectionality in organizing here in Japan. I think Nadina and Hanin, you guys would talk about intersectionality and how important it is to incorporate that in organizing in Japan. But since Japan seems so monolithic, even though it is not monolithic society, for example, it may not be visibly diverse. So if I say, for example, how do I say? If I say racial justice to people who are from rural part of Japan, it's not their lived, it doesn't relate to their lived experience, you know what I mean? So you have to do it in a way that make them feel, oh, it's related to their life.
Right.
Even though it may not be part of their lived experience or they haven't seen those people. So we had a privilege to have some diverse voices in our organizing. For example, Chinese Korean communities, and I wonder if we had any Ainu people speak, but we also had some people from Okinawa, because these are the settler colonial and colonial continuities that we live on. But it's so hard to work with Japanese supremacism, the Wajin supremacism.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we were just touching on nationalism here in the US, which is back, baby. But or at least, you know, it's been here all along. It's just like more mask off recently. So I wanted to talk about like a success that you all have had in Japan recently that I know in the UK, there's also been success around a company specifically named Elbit. Yeah, I was wondering if one of you could speak to that.
Yeah, I can. It definitely has been the biggest win, I would say, so far in terms of real direct impact, right? We're talking, having a company as big as Itochu, which is a mega corporation, cutting, ties with Elbit Systems has been the biggest win and something we really, I think, needed, for the movement as well. But it started with actually Mainichi Shimbun, this Japanese newspaper, reporting that Itochu and Nippon Aircraft Supply (NAS) decided to do a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with Elbit Systems, and this was in March 2023, so before October 2023, right? And there's been a lot of amazing people, which is another shout out that we have to do in an organization called Najat, which is the network against Japan arms trade. And they've been, very, very active in kind of anti-weapons, using the name of self-defense, and to increase and buy more weapons, etc. Just really giving a lot of pushback there. And they've been doing fantastic work. So they, once they heard about it, they started, a campaign against Itochu. And after October 7th, Elbit Systems everyone started talking about Elbit Systems again, shot Elbit down, hashtags. And when we heard about the link here, we were like, okay, something needs to be done. And this organization called Omo Palestine, it's a Japanese students and youth for Palestine organization. They started this petition to raise awareness about, this memorandum that Itochu has with Elbit. And that's when it all kind of kicked off. Started having, holding protests in front of Itochu's office in Tokyo, in other cities as well, in Hiroshima, and even in Canada as well. They also protested at Itochu's office. And, we just tried to get as many signatures as possible, tried to appear at their doorstep and annoy them as much as we can online, hashtags, etc. Really shaming them, because that's kind of the way with these, big companies. There's no other way, right? So we had about over 25,000 signatures on the petition, which I feel like also for Japan, that's quite a lot. And we submitted the petition. We were like, balls on your side now. And of course they didn't give us anything back really. So we called for a boycott campaign, which is what follows, right? Submitting a petition. And then that included, big brands like Family Mart, which Itochu has a big stake in, and a bunch of other brands. So, we just started calling BDS for all these brands. And even in Indonesia, where Family Mart is also quite big, they started pushing the boycott campaign. So it was very global as well. It wasn't just in Japan, although obviously a lot of the pressure was coming from here. And after a few weeks of just like consistently protesting and pushing, they cited the ICJ, and because of what the ICJ had said, they decided that they were gonna, cut the memorandum, since it was still just a memorandum, with Itochu. And it was a huge win. And we were like, okay, on to the next. Nippon Aircraft Supply, you're next. We organized another protest like the next day. I think we were so excited because we were just like, had all this energy. And we go next morning to Nippon Aircraft Supply and we start to protest. And then before we even get home, we see, Nippon Aircraft Supply decides to cut ties with Elbit Systems. And we were like, wait, what? We didn't even, that's crazy, And although they have been very wishy-washy, I don't really know how much they cut ties. They have been they're not in the clear, I would say, just yet. I think we need to kind of dig deeper there. But yeah, I mean, at least Itochu caved in and cut ties. So that was huge for us.
Yeah, that's great. And it is interesting how, these companies will decide to forego giving any credit to the protests, of course, or potentially the boycotts, and say like, oh, it was this legal thing that we had to respect, when underneath it all, that the protests were successful. But that is one of those things about this kind of movement work, is like getting gaslit by the people that you're targeting sometimes. So that's huge. I know that people have targeted Elbit Systems, this Israeli defense contractor here in the US. I believe they're mostly on the East Coast here, and just to not as much success. So we need to go harder here. Although I have heard in the UK that yeah, they've had some more success over there. Um,
UK, they've been shutting down factories and people, there's been
Yeah.
multiple arrests made. I
right.
will say something that is a challenge that we have as organizers here is many of us are foreign and many of us are on visas. We are not able to act in ways that, for example, UK nationals in the UK are able to act, US nationals are able to act doing direct action.
Yeah.
We are fighting with every single resource that we have. And there is just so many things that we're not able to do, unfortunately, that our comrades in the US and the UK are. And I'm not going to say I highly encourage them, but we're not able to do them. And other people who are able to do them, that's your choice.
Yeah, and if we were to do them, it would probably be best for us to not talk about it on a
Yeah.
public Zoom call. So
I also think the mistake of the justice system here is maybe different. I wouldn't say the justice system is perfect anywhere. But here, particularly in Japan, for example, if someone gets arrested, they can be detained for up to 21 days without charges or persecution. And I thought that was the same for everywhere pretty much. And whenever I see activists getting arrested, like peace in the States, I'm like, wow, like they're so brave. And I didn't know that they were not detained for like the next
yeah,
what?
yeah. A lot of the
Yeah.
times, it's a few hours. I mean,
Hours.
it
Yeah.
can be more, but yeah,
2 days
definitely at
max.
21 days. Yeah.
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 Um, that is, yeah, grounds for, I mean, your job might be gone at the end of that.
Yeah, and
Oh, sorry.
yeah, before we jump into the next one, the Itochu Corporation case was very much a success, and even without how the Japanese government reacted after the ICJ provisional order, um, which is pretty much nothing, Itochu decided to cut the ties. And I think it's particularly because they were business to consumer company. They
Mm,
had a lot of brands that
Yes.
that
Yes.
we as people buy, and Itochu is a global company, and they, I think, maybe majority of their revenue or close to majority is from outside of Japan. So I think they had a lot to lose if it
Yeah.
became like a global boycott.
mm,
I think right now we do have some other boycott targets companies, but some of them are business to business,
Yeah.
and it's really difficult to pressure them. So
Mm.
I think moving forward, it's going to be important to have international boycott movement for those global companies. For example,
mhm,
one target is Kawasaki Heavy Industries, and they also have a lot of sales from overseas, and Fanuc, which is a robot manufacturing company.
Mm.
And I think they also have a lot of income from overseas, but we're struggling to have them hear our voices. So
Mm.
if we can somehow find a way to do like a transnational boycotting campaign.
Yeah.
yeah, keep us posted if you decide to make that call. Get the word out over here as much as I can.
Yeah. Honestly, that's such a big thing. Like, all in all, I feel like, 400 days in, just like everybody's running around in their local communities, protesting, organizing events and film screenings and all these things. But I just feel like there's this kind of disconnect in a way between
Mm,
people all over the world, although we are so connected more than ever these days. We have like
mm,
all the resources at our fingertips to be like, all together. But everybody is so focused on their local communities and just, the next protest and this and that. And I feel like 400 days in, it's also kind of become a habitual thing. You've organized X amount of protests, X amount of events. So it's kind of just becoming, we need to like step outside of that
Yeah.
in a way and be like, how do we act together all around the world? We're so connected. And I even started making a sheet, and you're gonna laugh, but I started making a sheet of like creators or organizers, people from different like cities where they're based in, which organizing, which kind of like organizing group are they in or are they not, just to kind of see, okay, how can I find a way to connect to somebody in every single city around the world and then bring them all together and be like, guys, we need to like get it together. Like we really need to think about something bigger, like
Yeah.
aligned, And it's just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
how do we get there? It's tough, but I'm just like, I feel like that's where we're kind of getting at these days. Like we need
Yeah,
more.
the
Yeah,
strategy
it's
part
like,
of it. Yeah, I mean, and it is interesting to hear things like making this point about like, oh, like if you're gonna do these boycotts right now in 2024, it helps if they are consumer facing. And just, yeah, the different, tactics and strategies that you've like picked up from the past year plus and like what's worked and what has worked not as well. That is all super interesting for me to hear. And To that end, I wanted to ask a little bit about how this latest wave of genocide, because it's, the genocide didn't start October 2023. Like on a personal level, like how has this affected how you think about organizing? Has it affected, yeah, like y your point of view around organizing or around life?
It's a really hard question to answer in some ways because in many ways, organizing can be extremely isolating. I go to my job every day, and sometimes I will still see people with like Starbucks orders that they're bringing in, or like we'll have lemonade in our work fridge, and I'll like turn things over and be like, ah, yes, these are Israeli lemons. And it's just I guess I'm so in it that these things are like so second nature to me at this point to be like, oh yeah, this is a union boycott. So of course I'm no longer interested in shopping with this company. This is a specific BDS call. So I'm just not really interested. And there are plenty of other options. There are like, especially one of the events that happened recently was like, just like, oh, hey, you can use Hiroshi like lemons from Japan. We have domestically grown lemons. And there are lots of companies that use domestically grown lemons. You don't need these Israeli lemons, actually. I think I've realized quite firmly that people care about their immediate material conditions first and foremost. And that's why these like consumer facing boycotts work quite well, I think, or they give people something that they understand tangibly. So
Hmm.
to go back to Mai's point where she was saying like, oh, we couldn't be too aggressive in terms of like being anti-TRP. We as Nam Nam Space were pretty aggressive about it. We were like, nah, boycott it, fuck it. Like, I think me personally, I feel like people hand over their rights and their victories too easily in the name of compromise sometimes.
Hmm.
So in the case of like, TRP, yes, I understand. I'm a queer person. I get that pride is very important. And I get, especially in Japan, where there are still many people who are not out, and there are still many people who feel like in Tokyo, especially being gay is like something that's like involved in the nightlife scene, and that's kind of it in many ways. There's not like a queer culture in the way there is in the US and the UK, for example. Um, when we were like, okay, don't go to TRP, we gave people distinct material things that they could do instead. We put together a list of like, it must have been like 20 or so businesses and events and other stuff that you could do that weekend. So it's like, if you want to go to Pride, if you don't want to go to Pride, if you're with this issue, but you don't know what to do, we've done the thinking for you. Here are material things that are easy for you to do that you can just do now, and it's still going to be your community that you're supporting directly, but you don't have to hand over your principles in order to do that. And I think that that is something that I think about quite a lot now in terms of like my job is to convince people that they can make change and they can do things and their tiny contribution is valid
Mm,
towards something, because that's how you get people up
yeah.
ladder, right? That's, if we're talking about it in marketing terms, that's the funnel. We're our aim is to get people down the funnel. These are the ways that we start to make those tiny, tangible changes that make people think that bigger change can be made.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, good to be reminded of that because with things like the BDS campaign here in California, I know the Zionist narrative is like, boycotts don't work, which we've seen, even like, CEO of Starbucks or McDonald's attributing like, loss in sales to boycotts. So it's like even the CEOs are saying it, stop gaslighting me. But also, in on one hand, they're saying the boycotts don't work, but then on the other hand, they're also trying to criminalize the act of boycotting. So it's like, yeah, it's crazy making. So it's good to be, yeah, reminded of those things that like, yeah, when people are given alternatives and are like given like solutions that feel like they are part of something, um,
Yeah.
that it encourages them to get involved more.
Does. I think also I have kind of like historical precedent for that because I mean my family is Bosnian and we came to the UK when I was like one to escape the Yugoslav conflict. But I grew up and I lived in Liverpool for until my 20 until I was like 28. And Liverpool is a city in the UK that has, I think, I believe it may have been superseded now, but one of history's longest consumer boycotts. It may be the longest consumer boycott in history of the Sun newspaper,
Hmm.
due to the Hillsborough disaster, which was a disaster that happened at a football game, where 96 people were killed due to police kettling and police misconduct. This was blamed on the people of Liverpool, and it was published by the Sun newspaper. And Liverpool itself has a ongoing, now no longer ongoing, but kind of spiritually ongoing campaign called Total Eclipse of the Sun. And this is a over 30-year consumer boycott of the Sun newspaper. You do not buy the Sun newspaper in Liverpool, and that has contributed to billions of pounds of advertising revenue lost for the Sun, which is a Rupert Murdoch owned newspaper. It has led to a complete change in sentiment in Liverpool itself. Like it's a citywide boycott that has massive solidarity that eventually led to a police inquisition. So I think like if you, I come from a basis of understanding of that these things do work because I have seen them in my lifetime materially work.
Yeah, just being reminded of those examples where it's pretty clear cut that these things are working, so helpful because the point of Zionist organizing is to make us forget that we have agency and we can change things. Yeah, did you have any thoughts on like how the latest wave of genocide has affected um what you do on the daily?
Yeah. Yeah. I think first first half year to a year came as really shocking to me. It's like we live in a dual reality where, people are doing their everyday life as nothing has happened,
Mm,
but I
yeah.
see, genocide happening, on my device, but literally we're seeing different things on our timeline. And I realized for the first time that, oh, this is how genocide is happening all over the world and had happened in the past as well. But in that despair, there's this disability activist in Japan who said, when we share despair as a community, that's where hope emerges. And I think that's what I saw in organizing in pro-Palestine organizing in Tokyo. And
Hmm.
I met people who I wouldn't have met if it weren't for these organizings. And these people are so amazing, and we can talk about a lot of things. Um, and they're doing amazing work. Um, but I think it's important that outside of these organizing, I would still talk about Palestine to people. And I think on a how do I say on an individual interpersonal level, a lot of people now are just a little bit they're informed about Palestine, as I said earlier. And if if they feel comfortable talking to me, they would talk to me and ask me about what kind of material choices that they can make on a daily basis to stop the genocide. So I would, forward them the petition websites or some BDS target list. So those kind of like very humanity, these interactions that shows humanity in them, I feel hope. But on a more entity level, more like corporate level, it's like economy is unstoppable. That is kind of like a mantra. And and I think it's pretty much the same in the US too. But especially in Japan, um I think about the labor experience, how intense the working culture here is.
Mm,
Because the country has been experiencing economic stagnation for the last many, many decades. But all the major companies are making profit. That means we have been cutting cost,
hmm.
and that cost comes from labor.
Right.
It's from the outside labor, finding, cheap labor, or cutting labor force here in Japan. But still, the working culture remains the same, and we don't have even time for ourselves. So even if I want to mobilize these people, they're kind of like, no, I need time to sleep if I can add any more things on the plate. Um, so that's something that's been bothering me for the last 3, 4 months.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
I want accountability or code of ethics from in the corporate level, but there's no legislation. There there's no international, for example, there's no international body to hold multinational corporate accountable.
Yeah.
Um, there's a human rights and business thing that's happening at the UN, I think, but I don't think they've come up with any actual laws and stuff. And for example, Kawasaki Heavy Industry, I think they're facing or they faced some court cases in Korea about forced labor from Koreans during World War II. Some of the major companies that we want to boycott are literally the companies who were fueling World War II, the Japanese military. But I feel like we are seeing the glimpse of what these companies are capable of moving forward from their complicity in genocide right now. And I wonder if we can't hold them accountable or find a way to stop them right now
Yeah.
and what the future holds, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have to. Like, these corporations have too much power, and yeah, they're just trying to grow that power. Hanin, yeah, would you mind saying a little bit about how you felt, or if this past year and a month have changed your perspective at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, definitely, this latest wave of genocide kind of stripped away any illusion of normalcy, just I don't know. I feel like I haven't had a moment where I feel like there's something wrong and you feel this like heaviness and this weight on your shoulder, like that you cannot get rid of no matter what you do, no matter who you're around. It's, I walk down the streets and I see kids playing and laughing, and I can't help but think like, why do they get to be like happy and live in peace and, be safe when the kids in Gaza don't get to genuinely? And that's like the only thought I have, which is
Mm,
it's, I'm not like trying to, I'm always like, I'm happy that they're safe, they're happy, they're okay, but it's just like, you feel like it's so unfair. This world is just so unfair and it's just so unjust. And I don't know, just having to kind of deal with that weight has been so crazy. Obviously, we've known it all our lives as Palestinians. This is not something we woke up to last year. We've always known what we were facing. But, even talking to my aunt, and my cousins who've lived through every single wave of, oppression and of destruction from Israel, they've said if you combined all the other, wars together
yeah.
and compared it to what's happening now, it's like you can't even compare, because what's
Mm,
happening now is just something you cannot imagine. And
yeah.
I've seen the destruction, I've seen the rubble. As a kid, I've lived through the bombings myself. Like it's something, it's not new to us, but to see this level of destruction and this level of just blatant murder live streamed, everyone's seeing it, everyone's watching it, no one's being held accountable. Mai's talking about holding companies accountable. Nobody's holding governments accountable. Where's international law, ICC, ICJ, the UN? Nobody's doing anything, So it's just like, you just feel like all of these things that you thought were just normal, and the world was moving in this place and there's international law and there's accountability, none of that exists. And that mask has just been unveiled, and I think that's been the most powerful part. I would say that's the silver lining as well out of this whole nightmare, is just like we've all kind of woken up from this, like, we're just living this everyday kind of matrix. We kind of just woke up suddenly, like, oh, wait, hold on. Like, there's so much oppression happening worldwide. There's so much, abuse and corruption and exploitation. And we're just like pretending like life is okay. So I feel like that's been the best part of this whole nightmare happening in Palestine. And, every day I just feel that sense of urgency more. And I just feel like every action becomes more critical, becomes even more necessary. And I just like that drive hasn't stopped. And that's because I keep thinking about the people that are in Gaza that haven't stopped living, that have been resisting every day, have been walking for 10 kilometers to get some water, to send them a message, just to live through these brutal conditions. If they're doing it, none of us have anything to complain about in the grand
Sure.
scheme of things. Everyone is facing their own personal issues. Everyone's going through their own things, but at the same time, when you think about relatively to how they're living in Gaza, you're privileged, you're in a much better place. And for me, it's like you have that duty to just keep pushing and to keep organizing. And, you know, the part about the organizing that I feel like kind of transformed for me is when we started, it was Palestine doing all of these things for Palestine, for Gaza, but over time, of course, more and more people started talking about Sudan and Congo and Myanmar and Ryukyu Islands and Hawaii and all these places that are facing oppression in different kinds of ways, but are so interconnected. And I'm just like, okay, wait, why are we not fighting the same fight together? Why do I feel like, the protests for Myanmar and the protests for Sudan and Congo it's all separate.
Mm.
I get they're different issues in a way, but we're all facing the same system of exploitation and oppression. And if we can come together and fight these demons together, we're so much more powerful. And that's what I hope to kind of see a little bit more. We did do the Apple Accountability Day, which was a global action for Congo and for Palestine. And that, was quite big. People protested all over the world in front of Apple stores and on the day of the iPhone 16 launch. A lot of people learned about Congo and Palestine. They had no idea there was even that connection with Apple, at least here in Japan. Many people were shocked to see the signs saying, Apple is exploiting people in Congo. They had no idea. So just why can't we raise awareness about all of this together? Because we are fighting the same kind of oppression and the same, it's coming from the same place. So we got to do it together. So I hope to kind of see more of that until we're actually able to kind of liberate all of us and be able to actually say we are, free. We're not just living in this world thinking, we're dreaming of freedom. We actually get there and we can only get there together. So I hope that increases.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes into my last question pretty well. If you have any tips for people who, I mean, burnout, I think is not a word that I'm like thinking about too much right now, as like the election is like on my mind here in the US. I know that you all had an election recently with some weird stuff happening over there with like some politicians not wanting to step down. We won't get into that. But and then Germany is in upheaval on the like in the government there. Yeah, it's obviously it does feel like a time where there is no rest for the weary. That said, as we're going into, year two of the latest wave of genocide, any tips for keeping this a sustainable movement longer term? And I think what you just said, Hanin, is a big part of it, is like making those connections, making sure that we have each other's backs and being able to, support each other is such a huge part of it.
Yeah, no, just to add to that, honestly, it's like if we want to think about sustainability, because this is really truly a marathon, it's really about how do we strategize and how do we do things in a way, okay, like what is the goal? What are some goals that we want to achieve? Realistic goals, focused, targeted, persistent on certain companies, because I do feel like having one target and focusing on them and protesting outside their office every day and actually putting more work goes a longer way because they feel that pressure. Whereas if you protest every 4 months outside their office, they're not really going to feel like the heat. But if you're there every day shaming, blaming, here it goes a long way, I feel. So that having that kind of focus and maybe like specific targets, very important for longevity, but also just the community care, honestly. Like I don't know where I personally would be without having all these people around me that I've met in the last year and month. Genuinely, I don't know, because I never met such amazing people. And I lived here and I had, I had friends from school, etc. But I never met such people that cared and that were passionate and that really, felt that unfairness in the world and wanted to do something about it. And it's just been beautiful. So really just to kind of foster that community care and grow that, I feel like would be also very helpful to kind of sustain the movement, keep people together, keep people on the same page, and help each other handle the weight when you do feel like you're, kind of burning out, you need more rest, other people can take care and vice versa. So we need that. We need to have that kind of system. And I know maybe in different countries it works differently, but here it's not like one big organization that does, every single protest or event. It's like a lot of different organizations and groups are doing things,
Yeah, same.
which is amazing. Yeah, it's something that's great. And, strategizing together in that sense, I think would be quite beneficial. Yeah.
I think also like I do advise people to touch grass. I know it
Mm.
sounds really silly, but I think definitely over the last year, I've really become many times quite joyless. And
Mm.
it's very easy to do. Ways that I used to connect with people, like this is going to sound so banal and silly. I love photography. I used to post on my Instagram stories all the time. And for me, it felt really dissonant to keep just posting silly little photographs
Mm.
of like my day and my coffee and the art that I saw and my outfit, even though it's something that I really enjoyed doing. I felt like I just couldn't keep acting like things were normal and I can enjoy beauty in the world right now. But it was also the main way I connected with people. So I've lost a lot of that like everyday joy in service of like a greater cause, I think. And that can be very demotivating and very disconnecting and very isolating many, many ways. So that's like a big part of like how I connected with people previously is just not doesn't feel right for me anymore. And that means I have to find other means of connection with people, which is very often in person, very often in physical space, and like not feeling this huge sense of guilt when I do take a day off and enjoy a matcha and read a book and go and see some art or go shopping. Like I definitely spend a lot less time doing all of these things, but you actually do need to occasionally refill your cup and try not to feel terrible about it. Because that's ultimately what we are fighting for. It sounds extremely weird, but I began my community organizing as a fashion organizer. Like I would organize fashion meetups. And through those fashion meetups, I got to know people and I was like saying things like, oh, you need help with your CV? You don't know about these things? I can do that. I've been a corporate girly for ages. Let me look at this. And then we started doing like conventions and that kind of thing. And we were like doing makeovers to raise funds for Aid for Japan post like the 3/11 earthquake. And I was like, oh, I can do impact. I can make impact on a one-to-one personal level to people's lives. There are people who have met me personally and said, you have changed my life. You've changed the trajectory of my life. So maybe it's not the world, but you can change someone's world. And those tiny, tiny pieces of impact are what we are building to, is it not? We get there step by tiny victory. We call the world we want to come to us.
Yeah, that's huge.
I think I'm still struggling with burnout here and there, and I would love to see how, for example, therapists or counselors, I want to know how they can help aid how we do community care, since we don't have access to those socially or politically aware practitioners who can, incorporate that into their therapy counseling work. When you wake up and open Instagram and the first thing you see is, people being burned alive,
Mm.
I don't know how to go on in a day, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
how to process
Um,
it for sure.
yeah, and I feel guilty if I'm not aware of those things. But it is also true that we live in a privileged world. So, and the least thing I can be is perplexed or paralyzed. So maybe I change when I open Instagram and be informed of these things. Um, and but I think yeah, community is what keeps me going, and also seeing the humanity in people, as I said earlier. But to see humanity in people, I I realize that first you need to listen to them and be interested in them. I think, which is which had been very difficult for me, especially when on the not on the front of my head, genocide is happening, and what what's possibly worth talking about, if not,
Mm,
you know what I mean?
gotcha. Yeah. Like
And
everything else is frivolous or something.
yeah, but I think I had to come out of that. Um, the other day I was in a workshop about gender and sexuality, and people there were talking about how they're struggling with, gender and sexuality related issues. And I went there because I was invited too. And of course, I would talk about Palestine. But since I knew that people were there to talk about gender sexuality, which is still not pretty much an everyday topic for Japanese people in Japan to talk about, I was more on the receptive side. I wouldn't, push what I want to talk about onto those people. But on the second or third day, it was when we saw the people burnt alive thingy,
Mm.
and I just couldn't hold myself and just started bursting crying, and people were so stunned, but they I think they just went on talk about gender sexuality, and I was like, okay, that's expected, but it still hurts,
Mm. Yeah.
uh, but like 5 days later, people started to come to me, like sending me DMs about, hey, like I want to know about Palestine, and those felt very genuine, and I I I'm glad that, how do I say? I listened to them first, even though it hurt, and they came to me later. So that's something that I've been practicing so that I can feel humanity in them, even though their window is not open at the time that we see each other at the time. Trying to give
Yeah,
them,
yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
Of
yeah.
course, it doesn't work all the time, but
Yeah, that's helpful.
It's really tough, right? Because like I think a lot of our kind of modern world sometimes is about f avoiding feeling bad at any
Mm.
time. It's feeling bad is not a bad thing actually, and it is how we kind of register those emotions. The fact that you're seeing people burning alive and you feel terrible is a sign that your heart and mind are functioning as they should
Yeah,
properly.
for sure.
Be desensitized to those things, to not find them abhorrent, to find them run of the mill, or to say, well, it's not me, so pff, yeah, who gives a like that would be a significantly worse thing, I think, than to be deeply affected by it. Um, I I want to kind of stress to people always that like this is not an issue that gets solved and everything is hunky-dory within 1 or 2 years. Um, like I said, my family are war survivors, and I have seen now in my lifetime the 30-year impact of what is coming for the future for these
Hmm.
people. My family are now spread across the world. Many of them are deeply traumatized. I have family members who have extreme PTSD, who have really suffered from the consequences of things that happened 30 years ago. And I think like I would kind of like to caution people that we are not in this for like, oh, we're here for a year and then we can go back to our normal lives. The impact of what is happening now will be felt for the foreseeable future, and we need to
Mm,
work on ways that we can shift our mindset to a more long-term mindset and understanding that it's not just a marathon. This is the biggest marathon we will ever run.
yeah, yeah,
The families that message all of our Instagram accounts every day asking for donations, they will need that money for the foreseeable future. Um,
yeah,
so we need to steel ourselves, not just for a 1 year, not just for a 2 year, but for a 10, 20,
yeah,
30 year mindset shift of how we want to materially change things in our operations. I think um, we perhaps fight burnout by understanding that this is, we're not going on a diet, we're making a fundamental lifestyle change.
yeah, yeah, 100%. That's so true. Yes, you can feel it. I don't know. I feel like you can almost feel that this time period has been, it's like a very powerful, transformative time in history. Like when you've read, history books and you that shift in time, I feel like it's really happening in real time, and not a lot of people are like realizing it, but of course, a lot of people are kind of feeling it and realizing it, and people are saying, "Oh, this world is like so crazy right now," like even in this country, there's this is going, and this elections is happening here, and everything is kind of crazy at the moment, which is like this is the transformation that we need. And we
Yeah.
don't want to go back to normal. That normal was not normal and should not have been considered normal. But we were just too deep in living it. And we needed this kind of wake up call to be like, things need to change. Like, this is not the world that we want to live in and we want to have kids in. And, like, this is not it. And I hope we never go back to how things were because that wasn't right. There was so many things that were just so wrong. And I hope all of this kind of shifts to something. And, it's a lot of despair, it's a lot of weight, but there's hope for this kind of, you know, shift in the world. And I God knows what that's gonna look like, what that's gonna be. Who knows? Honestly, I pray that it's good. I hope that it's good. I pray that kids get to, live and fly kites in peace like the kids did today in the park in Tokyo. Really, genuinely, like that's all I hope for. If I can just add one more thing, my biggest fear is people just kind of giving up because they feel like, oh, it's been a year and a half, it's been 2 years. Like, we've protested, we did this, we did that, we're tired. I don't think anything's really gonna change. And that's genuinely my biggest fear because it cannot happen. And it's happened so many times in the past where people have cared for 2 weeks, 2 months, and just stopped caring, got busy, went back to the normal life that they wanted to go back to, and completely forgot about, all these injustices. So I pray, as a Palestinian, I pray that people don't give up, that they don't feel like this is not something that we can fight. As Nadina said, like this is a long, long marathon. This is, we're talking years, years. So people need to just shift their mindset, rest when they need to, as Nadina said as well. That's important, but really keep putting in the work and the fight because we don't want to feel abandoned again. We don't want to feel like the world stopped caring again. And we hope that this push and all this death and all this murder that we're watching, all these bodies that are being shredded every single day, we really hope that that doesn't go in vain and that we really get something out of it, like liberation, which is something that they've happily and proudly resisted and fought for and died for. So I really hope that people just keep going and don't get too demotivated where they stop.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I think some of the relationships that have been built in this little amount of time where people have to put deep shit like their values like on the table and relating to each other like is a huge reason for me that it feels impossible to not be thinking about Palestine constantly for the foreseeable future. Yeah, just meeting all of you and, you know, feeling like I've gotten to know you a little bit better. We only met briefly in Tokyo a few weeks back. But I mean, yeah, this is something that's going to sit with me. So thank you all. I know it's midnight there, so I want to let you go. Really, really, thank you so much for doing this. Make sure some people out here in California get to hear your words. And before I do let you go, wondering how people can follow your work. I'll start with you, Nadina.
You can follow Nam Nam Space on Instagram. That's namnam.space, is it? No, it's underscore. Sorry.
Cool.
You can
We'll
follow
link
our
it
work.
too.
You can follow our work at Nam Nam Space at namnam_space on Instagram.
Dope.
You can follow Palestine Japan, so at Palestine Japan, which is the Palestinians of Japan community, which is filled with Palestinians and many non-Palestinians as well, advocating for Palestine. So yeah, follow us there.
Cool.
I don't have any like public Instagram or anything when it comes to queers against Israeli apartheid. So I would say my personal Instagram, which is Yudeta Mai. But yeah, other than that, yeah, nothing international, I would say. Yeah,
Cool.
sorry.
Yeah, and you have videos I know of, we were talking about before you got on about the like Palestinian cooking lessons that you all did as like kind of a creative way to like raise the issue of Palestine. So I'll link people to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not my thing. It's Ida's thing, my friend who is a Palestinian, and she's doing a lot of cooking courses. And it attracts a different whole different set of people, you know, and connect them through cooking, which is deeply, deeply cultural and yeah. Check them
Cool.
out. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. We'll link to all these in the show notes. Again, thank you so much. Hope to see you back in Japan soon.
Yes, see you, inshallah. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you for listening to Sad Francisco. I am Toshio Moronic, and my co-producer is Tofu Estolas. Patreon.com/SadFrancisco is where you can find our past episodes and transcripts, and it's also where you can help us out with a donation. And if you do, it comes with some benefits like getting the episodes a few days early, and our gratitude for allowing us to keep making this podcast, which we love to do. See you next time in Sad Francisco.